Hello and welcome to our webinar, Telecommuting Employees, What are your compliance requirements? My name is Julie Dorr and I will be your moderator for today's event. Please take a few moments, if you haven't done so already, to answer the poll. Actually, I just closed the poll, so you're going to have to wait. But thank you for answering the poll. We're going to be having a presentation today that's going to last about 40 minutes. And with the time remaining, we're going to have some questions, but we're going to change it up a little this time. We're going to actually have the traditional way we've been doing questions where you can type it in and ask the question. But then we're also going to have you and allow you to raise your hand and you'll be able to ask your question live. Always trying to make improvements to our webinars. And of course, if none of that works for you, feel free to email me at julie@thedoorgroup. And we can definitely answer your questions that way too and supply you with those, any other things you might need, like the handout or whatever. Speaking of the handout, on the dashboard, I have attached the handout for today's presentation. Just take a few moments right now and download it so that you have it available during the presentation. Again, if you can't reach that, my email's on the screen right now, Julie@thedoorgroup. Send me an email and I will be happy to send you that document. And then, of course, before we get started, please note that this webinar and all of the accompanying materials are protected by copyright and that the entire conference is being recorded. This presentation provides general information only and does not constitute any legal advice. We recommend that you consult with your legal counsel to address any of your specific concerns. So we're going to get started today, and I've noticed that my pal Linda here hasn't been able to move the slides, so I'm going to move them right now. Let's start here with our all-star employment attorney, Marla Merhab Robinson, with the law firm MRJC. She's a partner and head of the firm's transactional department. She primarily practices in the areas of corporate, mergers and acquisitions, real estate, finance, and employment law. And then next we have our people problem solver, Linda Duffy, president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda works with business owners and executives to provide strategic human resources direction, develop leadership talent, and increase organizational effectiveness. So right now, Linda, I'm just going to share the poll. Hopefully you're still on.
I am. I'm here.
Okay. Can you see the poll results okay?
I can see the poll results. So it's always interesting to find out who's actually doing this and who's not doing it. And I do have a couple of clients that telecommute, and in fact my own team, we all telecommute because we all work out of our homes. And then my joke is Corner Bakery is our office because that's where we usually end up meeting. So it's interesting to see the results. So we do have quite a few. One of the things, Julie, that I think we should do at the end of this is we can certainly take questions live, but even more importantly, I'd love to hear from some people on the call in that 32% that actually have employees who are telecommuting, especially those that are non-exempt, because that's where we have some of the challenges. So at the end, we can open it up, and if anybody in that 32% would be happy to share their experience, we'd love to have it, because I don't think we're going to go the full hour in terms of the content. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I can move this or not, Julie. So far it's not letting me, so if you could just move the slides, that would be great. Perfect, thank you. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons we've experienced, and again, I'd love it if everybody would share their experience with us toward the end of the webinar, and you can just go ahead and shoot Julie an email and let her know that you'd like to do that, and we'll ask again at the end. Here are some of the telecommuting issues. These all touch on legal aspects. Exempt versus non-exempt, as I just mentioned, is always a big one. We're going to talk a little bit about travel time, having a safe work environment. There's some ADA and FEHA issues, and then reimbursing expenses for those employees that telecommute and what you need to know about that, and then minimum wage and sick pay issues as well. Then at the end, we're going to talk about things you need to consider when you're actually developing a telecommuting policy, because we do recommend that you have a written policy and you actually have a written telecommuting agreement with those employees who are telecommuting, so everybody's clear on what the expectations are. And then finally, as always, we'll take questions and answers. So some of the pros of telecommuting, and again, I do have some clients that use this, and it works really well for them. Not with, with no flaws, but it works really well. Increased flexibility for the employee and actually for the company, but mostly for the employee is certainly one thing. If you need to take time during the day to run out for an appointment or pick up the kids or whatever it is you need to do, as long as you're working your 8 hours and your company doesn't care, subject to, again, meals and break periods and things like that, then it gives everybody a lot of flexibility, which generally decreases people's stress and makes them happier employees. So I would say that's probably one of the #1 pros of using telecommuting employees. It certainly is more cost effective for both employer and employee, generally speaking, because for the employee, you're going to have less commute costs, fewer commute costs, and wardrobe costs, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're sitting in your pajamas at home doing the work or whatever. If you don't have to be face-to-face with somebody, generally it's not going to matter what you're wearing. And especially depending on where you live, gas costs are going to be significantly lower. And just, maybe your family only has one car. So one person telecommutes, stays home, one person goes to the office, whatever it is. It could also save some costs for the employer as well, just because you're not going to have as much infrastructure that you need in the office, so less space, for example. Hopefully it lowers sick days because less exposure to germs. Certainly better for the environment just overall, again, not having so many commuters out on the road. All of those things are going to lead to increased job satisfaction, generally speaking. There's less office politics, they have more independence in how they get their work done, and setting their own schedule, and just overall greater life balance, which is great. All of those hopefully lead to reduced turnover in the office. And then finally, and this is really significant right now, especially in this market, it increases your talent pool. If it doesn't matter where this person's located, they can be working out of any state, any city, wherever. If there's no geographic requirements, that's going to give you a much greater talent pool from which to recruit. One of the other things is a lot of people question whether telecommuters are as productive as people in the office, and we'll talk about that as a con also. But I found this poll online that was run by Gallup, and it was last summer, so about a year old, and they had done it over the years back in 2005 and 1995, so you can see the differences here. But overall, the big takeaway for me is 58% of the people that responded said that they believe that telecommuters are just as productive, and then there was another 18% or so that said that they were more productive. So overall, only 20% of people felt that they were less productive from people compared to people who work in the office. So I think that's pretty significant. The average number of days per month that people were telecommuting from this poll, just so you know, were about 2 days per month. They telecommute during the regular workday. And let's see, 37% of U.S. workers said that they've telecommuted, and that's up slightly from 30% the last decades, but it's up 4 times compared to the 9% they found in 1995. So it definitely is trending upward. So let's talk about the cons of telecommuting for a second. The first one is, some people have a higher need for affiliation than others. I don't necessarily miss working in an environment, where there's a lot of people around, but I'm also always at a client site as well. So I get my need for affiliation met that way. But some people would just find it the most horrible thing in the world, like a punishment if they had to work by themselves or where they couldn't collaborate with other people on a minute-by-minute basis. So it's not going to be good for everybody, but it is going to be it's going to be great for people that don't have that need for affiliation. It's also, I think, easier to build stronger relationships in person than via technology. So that decreased human interaction may cause you not to have such strong relationships in the workplace, so that's something you want to consider. Blurring of work and personal life definitely is an issue, and I can speak to that when working on my house. I pretty much can work 24/7 or 0 hours. It's up to me, but you can't leave it at the office. It's really hard to leave it at the office when your office is in your home. So unless you have a specific area that you work out of, like an office environment or something like that, in my case, I usually work out of my living room right here. So that's where I'm doing the webinar from, and that's how it is. So if you look around, it's it's my home, but it's also my office all at the same time. So again, for some people, that may be something they want to think through before they just jump on board with telecommuting. From a company perspective, I think it's difficult building and maintaining a corporate culture when you have people just scattered to the wind. And it can be done, it just takes a lot more effort. You lose out on things like, discussions around the water cooler or someone popping their head into your office and, chit-chatting, things like that. So you have to really make sure that your HR person or whoever, your key executives, are really good at communicating with people who are remote, people who, and this is true also if you just have remote offices and you have the majority of your employees like at a corporate headquarters. You need to really think through, okay, how are we going to exhibit our values to those people? How are we going to set expectations? Whatever is important in your culture, how are you going to communicate it and reinforce it for people who you're not going to see very often in terms of face-to-face? And then the last one, as I mentioned, for a lot of companies, their hesitancy has to do with number 4, which is just their difficulty monitoring productivity. One of my clients that has many remote telecommuting employees, they have a very sophisticated platform. They can see when people log in and out of the computer because most of that work is computer oriented. But think about, how are you going to monitor that? Do you care if the employees work 8 to 5, or are you going to let them be flexible as long as they get it done? So those are some of the issues that you need to think about before just jumping into telecommuting, and we're going to talk about some of those other issues when we talk about how to develop that policy. But for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Marla and let her go through the next few slides and talk about some of the legal issues. Marla?
Thanks, Linda. That was wonderful. I particularly like the slide on how it's increasing, and I look forward to doing this again in a year or two to see if that trend continues, which I think it will. But also, my time with you today is going to be very short because I'm dealing with the legal side of it, and California has no specific statutes relating to telecommuting. So we're going to talk about the statutes that are already in place relating to all your employees, federal and state, that will apply to telecommuters. And then when Linda talks about developing a policy, she also, and when she's speaking of the agenda, talked about recommending a written contract between the employee and the employer, and we certainly do that as well. And would encourage you, if you have telecommuting employees, in addition to the policy, to get such a contract in place. Either contact Linda, contact our firm, or contact another attorney. Linda also spoke about her experience with her company, all being telecommuters. With my experience, we have one telecommuter. We have an attorney who moved to Los Angeles and did not want to drive, but was such a fabulous employee. We didn't want to lose her, so we said, hey, why don't you just work from home? We'll set up your computer, your scanner, your printer, everything there, and the clients won't know unless you need to meet them, and then you can come in or you can meet them at their place, and it worked fabulously. She was such an excellent employee. However, she was an exempt employee. She fell under the professional exemption, meaning that she was a licensed professional, so there was no concern about non-exempt issues. The non-exempt employee raises a lot of issues, and for those reasons, some employers only allow exempt employees to work from home. This is a good time to remind you about exempt versus non-exempt classifications, because we're going to do another webinar. We've done one a couple years ago on the proper classification next month, and that's also very timely in light of the new regulations from the federal side regarding the threshold on the minimum amount of wages to be exempt to $47,476. We spoke about that a couple months ago. So non-exempt employees, you have the issues of timekeeping. Are they keeping their time? How do you track their time? Do you have them clock in and out? Do you have them complete a time card? Are they honest? How will you limit access to work after hours? How will you track it? Some employers do it by purely, we were going to track your time by your login and log out on your computer, and you're not allowed to use your cell phone, so that's a policy put in place. But I think this analysis of exempt versus non-exempt should come after the first question about the employee, which is why. Why the request for telecommuting? I gave you the example of mine. She had moved to Los Angeles and did not want to drive the drive to Orange County. Very understandable. So that's a good why. I think that needs to be asked every time, and we'll address some of the issues where it arises as a legal concern. Outside salespeople are defined in the industrial wage orders, and if you don't know your wage order, please reach out to Linda or me. You should always have your wage order posted. But they're defined as outside persons 18 years of age or over who customarily and regularly work more than half, which means 51%, of the time away from the employer's place of business. However, they have to be selling tangible or intangible items or obtaining orders or contracts for products, services, or use of facilities. So they have to be engaged in sales. Linda commented to me the other day that she had heard a speaker suggest that unless they're in front of a customer, they're not engaged in selling. We don't have that definition out there yet, but if there's an attorney out there who says they can make that argument, you can be sure someone will at some time. So additionally, meal and rest breaks are concerned with non-exempt employees that you don't have with exempt employees. How will you ensure that they take them? How do you know they've taken them? How are you going to track them? So those are all concerns, again, where, and I'm looking forward to, as Linda said, to opening it up to hearing about the telecommuters that we have online, the employers who are allowing them. Are you allowing them only with exempt or non-exempt, and how are you addressing these issues? Another issue that arises with the non-exempt is travel time. It arises, from the requirement of reimbursing an employee for all expenses, which Linda's going to talk about. And for those of you who like to read the statutes, it's in Labor Code Section 2802. Compulsory travel time no longer than the employee's would be normal work commute to the employer's place of business is compensable. So if my normal commute to my employer's office is a half an hour and I'm required to go another 10 minutes, that 10 minutes would be compensable. However, if the employee has no regular job site, then travel time is not compensable. So there's an argument that this is their regular job site, there's no travel, so there's no compensation. However, if you're working from home, if your employee is working from home and then is asked to travel to a customer's, that would be compensable. So that would be time worked. Additionally, there is no change reimbursement for mileage whenever they drive their own car. That doesn't change with the telecommuting. And the easiest way, obviously, here is the same as with all other employees, and that's to turn in an expense report showing the number of miles round trip and the purpose. Keep in mind, if you require the employee to come in for a regular site meeting at the office, that would be compensable as well if the employee's ordinary work site is their home. Another issue that arises is the safe work environment. Under OSHA, you are required by law as an employer to maintain a safe working environment for all employees. Many employers don't know this. It's funny to me. They know that OSHA's out there. They know that if there's an injury, that they've got to report it, but they don't realize that the statute goes beyond that. You are required by law to maintain a safe work environment. That's why you have inspections of what's safe and what's not safe with your equipment, the way the equipment's laid out. Well, this is true even if the employee is working out of their home. So what do you do to ensure that? Do you go inspect the employee's home? The likelihood of OSHA coming to inspect the employee's home is very unlikely. But what should the employer do? A determination needs to be made there. This also raises the issue that if the employee gets hurt at home, you have the possibility of a workers' comp claim. How do you know it was done during working hours? They're certainly entitled to a workers' comp claim if they are injured during working hours, even if they're working at home. So you need to establish a procedure, and this goes into the telecommuting procedure policy of what to do if an employee gets injured while telecommuting. That can also be found in your workers' comp policy, but it should be addressed in one or the other, and sometimes both. Another issue that can be raised are accommodations under ADA or FEHA. An employee may request telecommuting as a reasonable accommodation for covered disability. So for example, I may be disabled because I broke my leg. So I can't, or both legs. I can't walk, I'm not supposed to get off a seated position or a laying position, and so I need to work from home. Is it reasonable to allow me to work from home? Well, all those issues that we just discussed need to be looked at to determine reasonableness. Just like any other ADA FEHA accommodation, you always have to do the reasonable analysis, and that's no different here. But it is quite possible that it would be reasonable, and if you're not sure, obviously consult with an attorney and go through the reasonable analysis with them. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Linda.
Thanks, Marla. That was really helpful. Okay, a couple other issues that are touched on the legal side of things that have, been of issue for employers. The first one is reimbursing expenses. As Marla said, this is Labor Code Section 2802. So I had a situation with a client who uses a lot of telecommuters. They have them working from home. It's, as I mentioned before, very sort of computer-centric business, meaning the work that's getting done is all done on their proprietary platform. People are logging in, and whether they're in the office or at home, they're on a computer all day long, basically. And so a couple of years ago, there was a new decision that came out that said that employers have to reimburse even for cell phone use, and that you should come up with this reasonable method of determining it. Excuse me, that didn't really change the law from before because we've had it in this labor code, but it sort of gave new awareness to this whole issue. And so I sat with the client, and we actually went back and forth on how are we going to do this. If people are working in their homes, what aspect of those expenses are you responsible for? For example, do you have to provide them with a computer? Do you have to pay for their internet? Do you have to provide them with, a cell phone or a landline or something if they have to use the phone? So what I suggested, and what I will suggest to everybody that's on here is, take a look at your situation and determine whether or not the expenses are necessary expenditures. We're sort of hanging our hat on that phrase with this particular client when we developed their telecommuting policy, because we said, look, honestly, almost all of their employees have the option of coming into the office to work. They ask for the benefit of working from home. And so we took the position that because they had the option of coming into the office and using the company's equipment, that these were not necessary expenditures for them to work out of their house. Now I say we don't know any case law on this, so it's sort of an untested theory, but we're hanging our hat on this, and hopefully there's never an issue. We did, though, draw the line that if somebody worked out of state, for example, and was telecommuting from an area that would not be a reasonable commute, then in that case we sat down with them and we came up with some sort of schedule of payments. So we would say, okay, they'd fill out an expense report each month, and we would essentially pay for a portion of everything they had. So we came up with a dollar amount. This is what I do with someone who works for me. My recruiting director, Kim, I pay her a flat monthly fee that covers, a portion of her expenses, because as we all know, my cell phone I use for personal, I use it for work. My internet I use for personal, I use for work, right? So you wouldn't be responsible as an employer for 100% of those fees, but I think you do have to come up with something if they don't have the option of coming in and actually working out of your office. The other thing to know is for non-California employees, there's generally no requirement to reimburse employees for expenses. That sounds so counterintuitive to all of us in California because, of course, we have laws that regulate everything. But when I did do that analysis for that client a year or two ago, we couldn't find anything other than one state that had a mileage reimbursement requirement. So if you do have employees out of state, double check with somebody for that particular state, but there may be no requirement to reimburse. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't. I'm just suggesting that know what the requirements are before you go into this, assuming that you have to do it the way that California does it. Now, of course, we want to talk to an attorney on this, because if an employee brings a claim for expenses or unpaid expenses and they're successful, they also can recover attorney's fees. So it's not just a little item of, oh, I didn't pay that person their $5 a month toward their cell phone bill. It's actually going to be a lot more expensive for you if the employee is successful, because they will be able to collect their attorney's fees. Now, this last one I'm going to talk about before we talk about considerations for the policy will honestly probably make your head explode, so I'm just going to go through it at a really high level. But here's the craziness that's in California right now. If you have employees that are minimum wage workers, this really is going to apply to you. It's going to apply to you from a sick benefit perspective, no matter whether the person is exempt or non-exempt or whatever. But here's what's going on, and something that you need to think about. Let's say you have an office here in Orange County, but you have an employee that works in Los Angeles County. Okay, you would have a requirement to pay them at a different hourly rate as the minimum wages go up, because different municipalities, different cities have increased it and are going up at a different rate. So, for example, we don't go up in California to $10.50 an hour until January of this coming year, if you have 26 or more employees. If you have less than 26 employees, then you don't go up, I think it's for either 6 months or another year. So it's staggered, right? So you get a little makeup time if you're a small employer. City of Los Angeles, however, they already went up actually if you have 26 or more employees, and the same thing with the City of Santa Monica. So that's just minimum wage. So if you have a minimum wage worker and who's going to be telecommuting, you really need to give some thought to this, because if you're in Orange County and they're working out of their house, you're going to be responsible, in my opinion, for paying the higher amount. Maybe they only work 1 day a week, right? Now you're going to have to pay them the $10.50 an hour for that 1 day a week, but you could pay them the $10 an hour the rest of the week. So you're going to have to really give some thought to how you're going to manage this. Even more crazy making, in my opinion, is the sick benefit. So California has a sick benefit of 24 hours per year, right? That's been in effect for a little over a year now. Okay, City of Los Angeles and unincorporated areas said, you know what, we're going to double that benefit. So effective a couple of months ago, it's 48 hours per year that you have to either front load or grant or accrue for the employee. City of Santa Monica has a completely different level that's going to go in the first of the year. So it's going to be 32 hours if you have fewer than 26 employees, and if you have 26 or more, it's going to be 40 hours. So again, the problem is going to come up is if you have employees that are telecommuting and they're telecommuting from home, you need to take a look at where they actually are working, because we think that's going to be what dictates the level of benefit they receive. So let's talk about developing a telecommuting policy and some of the issues, and I actually have 2 pages on this. The first thing you want to do is think about who's eligible. As Marla said, you know, are you going to allow your non-exempt employees to telecommute, or is it just going to be for your exempt employees? You might want to say, you know what, you have to have some length of service before you can telecommute. We need to make sure you're meeting our expectations, for example. Maybe that's based on a performance rating or something like that. Maybe it's based on, okay, you're past your training period. It could be a lot of different things. But think about, you know, are there any sort of eligibility requirements? Do they have to maintain some sort of level of performance? Do they have to be an employee in good standing with regard to attendance or anything like that? Do they have to be in different types of positions? Because certainly if you're, you know, a retail clerk, customer facing, you can't telecommute, right? That's not something you can do from your home. Some employers might have some positions where you could allow telecommuting, but others where you can't. So you're going to want to set that in the policy. How often may they telecommute? Is this something they can do every single day? Is it just a day a week? Is it just under certain circumstances? So think through that. Talk about the approvals and how often it has to be pre-approved or reapproved. So is it something you can just get a blanket approval, and if you wake up one morning and don't feel like driving to the office, you can just call someone and say, hey, I'm going to telecommute today? Or is it something where you have to have a set schedule? What are the expectations with regard to schedule? Is it a standard work day? They're going to work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. They're going to take an hour lunch. They're going to take their 2 10-minute breaks. Or are you going to allow them flexible work hours where you say, I don't care as long as you don't go over 8 hours in a day if you're non-exempt, but I don't care when you get those done. That could be a flexible work schedule, and that's fine, but again, they still have to meet your productivity expectations, and you want to make sure they're still in compliance with the law with respect to taking their lunch before the end of their 5th hour, taking their 2 10-minute breaks, that type of thing. How are you going to monitor the employee, if at all? Not only do you have some privacy expectations if you're going to be, you know, logging in remotely to their computer or they're logging into your system, you want to take a look at that. How are you going to monitor them? Make sure that you're letting them know how you're going to monitor them. And also, the same thing Marla talked about with regard to tracking their time and making sure that meals and breaks are taken. Do they have to have some sort of signal they put up? Is there, you know, a chat system where they have to tell people when they're on their break? Do they have to, you know, somehow flag their system that they're out of the office, even though they may have just moved 2 feet away, you know, and are sitting at their, you know, breakfast table or something like that? And then, as we already talked about, you know, what are the costs that company is willing to reimburse? Is it anything, everything? Is it a portion of, you know, different parts of the bills? How are you going to take a look at that? And what's their responsibility for how they get that reimbursed? Is there an expense form, or how do you do that? Talk about sort of the logistical requirements, meaning, you know, do you have a requirement that the employee has to have some sort of designated space that they're going to use to work in, where they can work free of distractions? You know, this isn't meant to be a substitute for child or adult care. It's not meant to be, hey, they can work from home because. But as Marla talked about, it could be a reasonable accommodation. So let's say somebody gets injured, they can't drive for a period of time, but the doctor says they're okay to work, they just can't drive, and you think, all right, here's what we'll do. We'll have you telecommute, but maybe they have, somebody else living at home, right? Is that going to be a distraction that allows them to get their job done? Do they have animals or people or neighbors or whatever that could be a disruption for them? So think that through as well. Also, does the employee have the appropriate technology at home? You're not required to go out and provide it to them necessarily, but it's something you should definitely want to check. Do they have internet access? Is that internet access fast enough to support whatever system you're using? Do they have the right software on their computer? Just basic software. If you use Outlook, for example, for communicating via email, do they have Outlook on their computer at home? Can they download whatever software platform you're using or tap into it somewhere remotely? So go through all of that, have your IT department or consultant look at that. And then also, of course, are there appropriate security measures in place to protect confidential information? Is there a firewall? Is there, any concerns you have with release of that information or access to it? And also with the employee, again, having access to your systems if they're logging in remotely. You want to make sure that whatever these eligibility procedures are, that you're going to apply them, uniformly across the board. What I don't mean by that is if you offer it to one, you have to offer it to all. I hear that from my clients all the time. I say that's not the case. If you offer it to some people in that same class, you want to make sure you offer it to everybody in that same class. But again, you can dictate what those eligibility requirements are. So if it's, a certain position and only if you're in good standing and have had perfect attendance and you've worked there at least 6 months and whatever those rules are, then that's fine. Anybody that meets those requirements, so you should make sure to offer it to them. And then finally, you want to make sure you write all of this up into a telecommuting agreement. Marla says contract because she's an attorney, but I say agreement. You want to write it all up and make sure that the employee signs it and has a copy of it, so you can always refer back to that. Okay, that's it for this part, Julie. So if people have questions, I'm going to turn over to Julie in just a second. I also just wanted to remind people one quick thing before we move on, and that is that remember that California employers have the requirement to offer anti-harassment training to supervisors and managers if you have 50 or more employees. I was looking through my calendar the other day, and I noticed that a lot of my clients are coming up on that 2 years again. If you need that training done, please reach out to me. We do that. We can also do it in Spanish, just so you know. But there is a requirement for every 2 years for those managers and also within 6 months of becoming a supervisor or joining a company if they can't show that they've had that training prior. We are also going to be offering a makeup class as a webinar. Some of my clients that I just recently did in person and training for. There's always a couple of people that can't make it for whatever reason, so we're going to be doing a webinar. So if you have a one-off employee, maybe you need to get them remedial training, maybe you don't have 50 employees but you want your manager to get trained, something like that, reach out to me and we can discuss that offline. And with that, Julie, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Linda. We are going to, as I mentioned earlier, employ a new way of doing Q&A. So the old way, of course, was opening that question section on your dashboard and just typing the question in, and then I'll read it aloud for Linda or Marla to answer. But the second way, of course, is to raise the hand. There's like a little icon on your dashboard. Just click that, and then what I'll do is unmute you so that you'll be able to answer the question live. And of course, if neither of those appeal to you, certainly feel free to email me at julie@thedoorgroup.com. So first of all, we do have a question. Cindy sent in a question saying, and she addressed it to Marla, if you have a request from a maybe not so good employee, can you deny the request based on the performance, and if so, how?
Marla, Julie, I'm sorry. I'm on, but you cut out after, if you have a good employee who makes a request.
Not so good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Not so good, yeah. If you have a not so good employee, can you deny the request based on the performance, and if so, how?
Of course you can, yes. Yes, you definitely can. It just raises the issue of what Linda brought up about if you allow a certain class of employees to do so and you say no to one, does it raise a question of discrimination? So you want to be able to show that the reason the request was denied was not based on their being outside this class, or being inside a protected class, excuse me, but it was because of performance, so be able to document the poor performance.
Okay, good.
And we should say, yeah, we should also say aloha to Cindy because she's joining us from Kauai today.
Oh, we don't feel sorry for Cindy.
I know. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, then Stuart has a question too. Can you briefly touch on the requirements regarding exempt versus non-exempt?
I can do that quickly, but then I would encourage you to come spend an hour with us next month because it is a lengthy conversation, but let's just start with, there's primarily 3 plus our outside sales people that we talked about earlier, and I gave you the definition for that. But the 3 exemptions are the professionals, the licensed professionals. That's the easy one to knock out. Doctors, engineers, lawyers, teachers. So if you have those licenses, you're exempt. That doesn't apply to a lot of you, I know. The second easy one to knock out we call management. They call it something else in the wage orders, but you must have someone who works 51% or more of the time in managing employees with the authority to hire, fire, promote, demote, or at least to participate in that decision-making process. The biggest case out there to read up on this if you want to is Taco Bell. It's one of the biggest. It's over $30 million. They had managers that they called key managers who did work with scheduling employees and hiring, firing, promoting, demoting, but they were selling tacos 51% or more of the time. And then the third is the more difficult one and requires a lengthy analysis, and that's administrative employees. And those are the employees who work with the owners of the company on administrative policy and not on the business of the company. So if the business is manufacturing and selling, they don't work in that area. They work on business policy. All 3 require independent judgment. All 3 have the minimum salary requirements we talked about earlier. And a lot of other analysis that we can go through next month.
Okay, good. Linda, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Nope.
Okay, and then we have Kelly. She's asking if a California non-exempt employee telecommutes 5 days a week and is required to report to work for a meeting, do we have to reimburse them for their travel time and mileage?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. And then that was
there you go. I think here's
yes.
But here's what I would also say is you want to make sure that you're specific about that requirement in your telecommuting agreement, right? So similar to, I've been telling you about this one client that I have, that's what we put in their agreement that they're required to attend a meeting on site one day a week or something like that. You could also set it up that they telecommute 4 days a week and they're responsible for coming to work 1 day a week at that location. And then I think you avoid paying that because then that's the regular commute, right?
That's correct.
But if you just call them up and go, hey, I want you to come in tomorrow, and they're usually working out of their home, then I think what Marla said is true. You've got to pay them for both of those things. But I think you also can set the expectation and avoid that.
Great.
That shows the importance of the agreement. That shows the importance of the agreement, and if not an agreement, at minimum, the policy should spell it out there.
Okay. And I have a question I'm just going to ask you both. You both are successful at using telecommuting as part of both of your companies. But, you know, Yahoo recently just rescinded all telecommuting and has everybody coming back and working into the office. What are some of the things that you would look for that you would actually make that decision?
Well, I can start with what I suggested earlier. Why the request for the telecommuting? And then to, I think it was Julie's question, is this a good employee that you want to keep around? I think Yahoo's going to lose a lot of employees, especially the millennials. The millennials are almost demanding telecommuting. Linda?
Yes.
You have anything to add?
I would say I don't remember what the impetus was for that, right? I remember she caught a lot of flack for that. I always start with, you know, what are you trying to achieve here, right? So start with the outcome, or as Marla said, what's the why, right? Are you having people telecommute because the employee is lazy and doesn't want to come into the office every day? That's not necessarily a good reason. You know, do you have space limitations? Do you want to use that as an incentive to employees? You know, what is it you're trying to do? But if your culture is such that you have a lot of ad hoc meetings, or there's a lot of decisions get made by pulling people together and brainstorming, or, you know, it's some sort of collaborative environment, then I don't think telecommuting is probably going to be the right answer for people that, you know, that need to be next to other people to be able to do their job. So I would just say, again, always think about, what's the benefit to the employee, what's the benefit to the company, does this make sense to do, and can we still achieve what our end goal is here?
Well, and great suggestions and great points, because especially Marla with the millennials, you're right. And I know down here in San Diego, they're experiencing quite a difficult time recruiting and retaining those employees who want a little bit more flexibility in the workplace. So very good point. Sherry has a question here. She has an office in Anaheim in which they sell parts. They have an employee who was an inside sales assistant, and they moved to Maine. And so they kept him on and made him an outside salesperson and classified exempt. Does the minimum exempt $47,000 apply to him? For expenses, they have a written deal in that he would provide his own computer, office, internet, but they provided him with a phone.
So what was the employee's job position again?
It says outside salesperson. It now says outside salesperson.
Oh, you made him an outside salesperson. He was an inside sales assistant. Now he's an outside salesperson and classified exempt.
Linda, can you take this real quick? I've got it.
Yeah. Yes, seriously. So what I would say is this, Sherry, if the person's truly an outside salesperson, and again, you're going to want to make sure that in this case, because they're out of state, you're complying with the Fair Labor Standards Act. If they're going to meet the requirements under the Fair Labor Standards Act for an outside salesperson, that's a different type of exemption, and you don't necessarily have to pay them any salary. You could make them commission only, for example, something like that. So we would need to have a conversation more about what their duties are and are they truly meeting the requirement of outside salesperson. But if they are, then the 47476 number is not going to apply to them. And then expenses, I don't think there was a question. It was just a statement that they were providing their own stuff, and that's fine because again, you want to double check Maine's rules, but I could not find another state besides California that has a requirement to reimburse employees for their expenses, except for I think it was Massachusetts had a mileage requirement.
So my apologies, everyone. Somebody walked into my office, so I had to take you off so you didn't hear background noise. Thank you, Linda, for taking that. I'd also just remember, what we call cross-border issues when you're dealing with other states. Some states have employment taxes or other tax issues that depend on where the employee works. I did not do research like Linda did. I don't know if the other states have any telecommuting laws on the books yet. I certainly would expect that almost all of them will in the next couple of years, but I would just encourage you to check that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. And Kelly has a question. For California telecommuters, outside of travel time and mileage, what other expenses would we be required to reimburse them for?
Well, again, the section of the Labor Code, Kelly, is 2802, and it says all necessary business expenses, right? So you would have to ask, what is it that you need them to do? If they're sitting at home and can do their work with a pencil and paper, then I suppose you would need to reimburse them for pencil and paper. Most of the days now we're going to have a computer requirement. So do I think you need to go out and buy them a new computer? Probably not, but if they're using a personal computer for doing work, then I think you need to come up with some sort of shared expense model there. So the best example I can give you again is my director of recruiting. She works from home. We have a flat fee established, and that's to cover the expense of her using her computer, internet, telephone. Those are the three big ones that I can think of that you would want to take a look at, but I'm sure there's more. I mean, if she goes out and she buys paper for her printer, anything like that, she submits it on an expense report, because I'm responsible for paying it, just as I would be if she, was working out of an office with me. We've just chosen to do it this way.
Let me just add with respect to this computer issue, because it comes up all the time in telecommuting, that in addition to expenses, you need to consider, again, what is this worker doing? My worker was working on incredibly confidential material belonging to clients. We have our attorney-client privilege. Some companies have intellectual property that it's very confidential, and they want access to that computer at all times. They want to be able to shut it down when they can. If they're using their personal computer, you may have difficulty getting company material back if you terminate the employee. So there are a lot of arguments to be made in favor of providing the computer to the employee that have nothing to do with expenses. They have to do with privacy, confidentiality, and electronic monitoring.
Good point. Very good point. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. We have no brave souls that were willing to raise their hand and talk live to us, so we're going to kind of wrap it up today. I think we scared them with that idea. They thought, no way am I going to do that today. So basically, Linda, actually, I think what I'm going to do is turn it over to you to kind of wrap it up for us today.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you found that useful. If you need help drafting a telecommuting agreement or have questions that we didn't get to, by all means, reach out to me or Marla. Our next webinar, as Marla mentioned, is going to be on exempt, non-exempt. We're calling it Why Can't I Just Pay Everyone a Salary? It's going to be on October 27th at 11 a.m., and then there's a place where you can register. You know what, Julie? I have a feeling that registration link is the old one, unless you updated it. So. Well,
I did not. So my
yeah, it's probably the old one.
Okay, we will send out. Actually, we'll send out a copy of the recording of this webinar, and we'll include the link to the next one.
Perfect. Yeah, I forgot to update that one. So anyway, so hopefully you can join us for that one. That's always very popular. Make sure you register early because we are going to limit it to 100 attendees, and that one fills up fast. And then again, if you need anti-harassment training for anyone in your firm, please reach out to me and we'll be happy to schedule that. And with that,
Great.
I want to say thank you, Marla. Thank you, Julie, for another great seminar. And we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you.
Thanks.